I am very much aware this is an unpopular opinion, but I gotta be authentic, you know? Before I was introduced to the X-Men, Infamous was one of the few series that fully introduced me into the forever winding universe of superpowered characters. Cole McGrath was one of the characters that finally broke the chain of always seeing the most black characters having lightning powers. We finally got some good old white in our lightning powers, and I was thoroughly satisfied. All jokes aside, the first two games to me will always be iconic, and when the announcement was released that the third game was coming underway back in 2013, I was pretty excited to play. However, to my dismay, I wasn't the biggest fan of Infamous Second Son. I saw the great potential the game had, and I was fairly disappointed to witness a lot of that potential get wasted, and mostly with the field of its storytelling. Delsin Rowe, the main character, had a personality that kind of got left behind in the wind, while the decisions of the game felt like there was no room for imagination for the player and didn't feel like they emphasized the actual narrative impact those decisions made. So today, I think it's just my sworn duty, since my last video has been a while, to rewrite the story of the third game, Infamous Second Son. Now let me get it straight right now, I don't necessarily think the game is bad. I do like a lot of different things about the game, like the gameplay and some of the mechanics, but this is more on the lines of me describing the story being misguided. Before we get started, let me do a really quick rundown of the basics of the story of Infamous before I get right down to the rewrite. A carefree bike carrier named Cole McGrath was doing his job one day and he had to deliver a package. Unfortunately, to his curiosity over a strange package one day, he accidentally became the cause of a devastating explosion that happened in the middle of his hometown, Empire City. There is this organization known as the First Sons, who are responsible for the device that was known as a ray sphere. Scientists in that organization discovered that there are some people in the world who are walking around with a gene that they have marked as the conduit gene. A gene, when activated, I don't know how you freaking activate a gene, but go off, I guess. The person with the gene can achieve amazing superpowers. Very similarly, or actually almost borderline exactly, the Marvel universe when it comes to X-Men. Only difference, we don't have like mutant rankings like Omega or Alpha level mutants or whatever. And instead of mutants, they are known as conduits. And the more ray sphere energy one conduit absorbs, the stronger they become. In the first game, Cole, after the explosion, survived and soon learned he gained the ability to control lightning. He was pretty much instantly titled the Demon of Empire City when he started leaving the blast radius. Therefore, naturally, all the people either hate you or just want you to leave. Also, to add insult to injury, an illness has spread across the city and beyond not too long after the explosion known as the Plague. All he wanted to do was leave the city. But unfortunately, the First Sons, FBI, ex-First Son scientists can't have you leaving, so they blackmail, threaten, and control Cole to do as they say while he's keeping them under constant surveillance. You travel in the game with your best friend Zeke and your dumbass wet blanket of a girlfriend Trish. Long story short, the story is pressing you to learn who is the leader of the First Sons, the causer of this messy mess. And after your best friend betrays you because he wanted to nick some powers for himself, your girlfriend gets sent to the Shadow Realm and you try your very best to save her.
Cole, please save me!
Oh no, babe. These are the Dr. Miami doctors. We gotta make sure these ladies can still get their BBLs.
But Cole!
No buts, Trish. I have to do this for the greater good. And not too long after that, a black guy named John White gets vaporized. Finally, you learn that the leader of the First Sons is this guy named Kessler, and he is Cole's future self. Kessler was from a future where he was on the run with his family and avoiding a fight with a creature known as the Beast, until it killed his family and he spontaneously somehow developed the ability to time travel. How?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
He wants to train Cole to become the perfect version of himself to face the Beast, ruthless, detached from emotions. After Cole beats Kessler and knows the truth, he begins to prepare for the Beast, which brings us to Infamous 2. In the second game, you still team up with your best friend Zeke, and you also team up with this FBI agent known as Quo to prepare to fight against the Beast, but he decides to run a fade with you very beginning of the game, frame 1, you get washed and Empire City gets deleted off the map. Therefore, Cole travels to New Marais and is given a device called the RFI, an anti-race sphere that is designed to kill the beast. But unfortunately, Cole isn't strong enough to activate it yet. So Cole ventures through the story searching and collecting for blast cores, chunks of race sphere energy that he is able to absorb in order to become stronger. He meets new conduits like Nyx, and you meet a guy that I can only describe as Conduit Hitler, and you learn the secrets of the beast, like him being the black guy, John White, who got vaporized in the last game. His goal isn't to destroy everything, but to activate as many conduits as he can because his powers allow him to do that. Also, John shows Cole him the true reality of him being the quote-unquote first conduit. For example, he learned that when he first activated Race Sphere in the first game that gave him lightning powers, he was the direct cause of the creation of the plague due to Race Sphere radiation. Therefore, the main focus of the game becomes Cole thinking whether he should use the RFI to kill all conduits to save the majority of humanity, or join the beast and save all conduits but kill all humans to the plague. But however, the canonized ending is Cole sacrificing himself and all conduits to save humanity and cure the plague. Which leads me to Second Son, the game that follows 7 years after the second game's ending, and we are introduced to Delsin Rowe, a young graffiti artist and a petty criminal from the Okomish Reservation in Seattle. In this moment in time, the US government has established the Department of Unified Protection, or DUP for short, to hunt down and capture the remaining conduits, or in this point in time, bioterrorists. One day, a DUP truck that is carrying some captured conduits skipped a stop sign and crashed, and the prisoners escaped. Delsin accidentally runs into one of them and absorbs his ability to control smoke. From then, he runs into Brooke Augustine, the head of the DUP, and she has caused the reservation to become sick with her concrete manipulation powers because she believed that Delsin was hiding the prisoners. That becomes the spark of Delsin to go on this journey to find all the escaped inmates, copy their powers, and become strong enough to take down Augustine so that he can take her powers and save the reservation of their sickness. Cole and the characters in his story will always have a special place in my heart, and I really wanted to like Delsin's story, but I, personally, couldn't get into it. If you're someone who doesn't mind a super stimulating story and just wanted to take part in the open world and gameplay, then go for it, by all means. In that regard, the game is fine, it's good, but for me, I wanted the story to be a bit stronger for me to fully enjoy the story. I know for a fact if the Spider-Man games had a lackluster story, I wouldn't be able to finish the games and only would have swung around until I got bored. Delsin had the persona that would make him an interesting character, but I think the journey he goes on doesn't really facilitate a significant growth as a character. At least in Infamous 2, based on the decisions you do, you felt like Cole's journey and character was reflected through his actions, dialogue, and of course the ending of his story. Delsin's doesn't really change, except that happens at the end if you decide to go the good route or the Infamous route and give or take some dialogue. Honestly, it almost feels like that you've been confined to the good route if you want to feel the most authentic form of the story, while also the ramifications of the events of Infamous 2 doesn't seem to have really any direct or affliction of the world narrative except maybe the DUP. But even then, the story stems from the events of Infamous 2, and I feel like that the events were underutilized. So from this point on, this is how I would rewrite the story of Infamous Second Son. So first off, the beginning to me was the strongest, so I would relatively keep that the same. We are introduced to Delsin defacing the billboard of his brother's face and being introduced to the connection he has with Betty, one of the Okomish members, and his parental figure since his and his brother Reggie's parents have passed away. Also, I would keep the conversation between Delsin and Reggie that happens after Delsin gets caught tagging the billboard, because I feel that adds a little bit more character presentation for both characters in that moment. Also, I would keep the DUP crash relatively the same as well, but I would make a few changes. As the crash happens, I would make it that there are 4 escaped conduits instead of just being Hank and 2 others. And also, I would not make Hank the smoke conduit anymore. Just bear with me with this change, because I personally always felt like that the aesthetic felt more natural and fit the personality of the character of Delsin more compared to it just being on another character and Delsin just happened to grab hold of it because of his copying abilities. Also, I'm just not the biggest fan of characters who have the ability to just simply copy other people's powers almost indefinitely and infinitely with almost little to no ramifications. The only characters that I like that have those kinds of abilities are like characters like Rogue from the X-Men. However, I digress. Reggie chases after them, attempting to arrest the escaped conduits, and Delson follows behind. They capture Hank, who I've changed that he has the ability to control and manipulate wind. He is caught at an already destroyed DUP checkpoint that's nearby the reservation and attacks Reggie, sending him flying past Delson, but Delson tackles Hank and catches him. Reggie gets up and catches up again, but instead of being Delson caught and being held captive by Hank like in the original game, Hank just attempts to use his abilities to scare off Reggie and Delson both at the same time. However, it doesn't work. They are not scared, or they may be scared, but they are still brave enough to go and interact with Hank. But as a last-ditch effort, Hank decides to release a massive shockwave, sending everyone flying to make sure that he can just get away from everyone, destroying the DUP area that they're already in more than it already is. Then, out of view, like in the original game, a few damaged core relays are nearby, and because of Hank's attack, a lot of the checkpoint collapsed, including some of the walls and everything that fell apart, causing the core relay to become unstable and cause a minor reaction. This minor reaction sent out minor and unstable pulses of ray-fueled energy emitting from the relay, and as Delson tries to recover from Hank's attack and try to run away from the incoming explosion, he can see his hands and body start to shift and change, seeing smoke emit from his hands and all that good stuff. Hank has already escaped towards a reservation, and Reggie attempts to help Delson. They get a few steps away, but at a last-ditch effort, Delson pushes Reggie further away and the explosion goes off, causing a massive ray-fueled energy field burst. And then we pick up from the story where Delson wakes up and discovers that he has smoke powers. Now further on, like in the game, he is scared and petrified of being a bioterrorist, and he is wishing everything is just a dream. He then saves Reggie and goes back to the reservation because Hank has started burning down the building like he did before, or we can change it to be relating to his wind powers. He creates either a small hurricane over the reservation or creates a massive tornado to make sure that he gets a distraction away from the DUP that's coming to catch him later. Which brings me to one of my next changes. I would lead to the point where we remove the first decision that's prompted to you after you catch up to Hank in the reservation. I would make it that as a part of the story you still save Betty and you fight Hank and you encounter Augustine and the reservation becomes sick because of her powers and Hank gets taken away by the DUP. Then we move on to the actual meat and potatoes of the story, the very true beginning, where Delson decides to venture towards Seattle to go against Augustine to save the reservation. He searches for the other escape conduits, and instead of trying to pillage their powers or anything like that, like in the original game, I would simplify it to where he decides to try and build up a team against Augustine. However, I would make it that the first decision be that when he found Hank again in Seattle, he has maybe 3 total interactions in the entire game. When the next time he meets him, he claims that he knows where the other 3 escapees are and is willing to help unless you help clear his record, and he's officially a free man and you get him enough money to get out of Seattle and his daughter. Now, of course, Delson and Reggie both agree, and Hank points out towards a compound that has some conduits locked up and are being prepped to be sent to the DUP prison. Reggie offers to get in contact with his cop friends to help liberate the conduits, and Delson would also focus on destroying the communication of the compound so that the DUP can lose control of it and it can be used for other useful needs, like either making a safe place for those conduits or anything else like that. However, Hank provides the infamous choice. Being a team up between Hank and Delson alone, they go into the compound and destroy it entirely, which possibly might lead to the casualties of other DUP members or maybe some conduits in the crossfire, but their goal is to just simply catch other conduits. And from there, you are prompted with those 2 main decisions. This feels like a more effective first decision than the game's original one because I thought that deciding to sell out the reservation felt like a very forced evil decision, because from the very beginning you are not giving any real incentive to actually turn against the reservation at all. The Akomish woman, or Betty at this case, was already trying to be a powerful and strong parental figure for Delson, and there's already seeming some very high caring for Delson. So picking the infamous choice just feels like a complete and utter dick move for no reason. And at the end of that mission, you can make it that instead of it just being a one-off thing, you actually have some compounds where you can go and you can liberate other places to free other conduits, and you can do certain actions that would be considered good or infamous. Now, going back to the story, Hank is now on your team, but doesn't know anything except about where the other compounds might be, because in your first excursion you did not find one of the escapees. However, we have Reggie find where one of the other escapees, and that's when we get introduced to Fetch. I wouldn't change much on how Fetch is introduced, so I would just use the original game story as reference for her introduction. She's, been running around killing drug dealers in the name of her brother, who was accidentally killed by her neon powers due to the drugs that they received. It is confirmed that she's one of the escape convoys by Reggie, and Delsin catches up to her and recruits her by either helping her kill drug dealers or expose drug dealers, which is another possible infamous or good choice. While interacting with her, Delsin learns of the other possible experiments happening in the prison and that it goes beyond just making DUP officers. It is discovered that she also wants to enhance the officers further with other conduit powers to make them more formidable, to make capture for conduits easier. After your interactions with Fetch, Delsin gets contacted by Hank about another compound with hostage conduits, and it confirms one of the conduits that is being held is one of the escapees. I would name this conduit Dawn. This compound is one of the biggest compounds in the entire game that hold the most amount of conduits at this point in time, and also has a side branch that holds on and does testing and experiments. Dawn would be the last conduit you find in the compound, and he is in the process of being experimented on. He is freed, and you bring him back to Reggie to help him bring him back to health. However, after a day or so, Dawn sneaks out after being healed, but it's not too long after he left that he contacts Delsin to ask him to meet. Now we get into another mission where it's curated with Dawn that he's looking at an offshore testing site. In his background, I would make it that he is marked as Prime B, a special conduit that Augustine subjected to relentless tests. He is on the search for the head scientist that he learned is on one of these testing sites or on multiple testing sites. Delsin would learn that this conduit has the ability to stockpile powers into his body like a power container. However, due to the tests being rather incomplete and unsatisfying to Augustine, the powers are diluted versions of the original. Dawn currently has accumulated 3 powers already due to the tests that he has undergone. However, he refuses to use his powers until he learns the names of the people that originally had those abilities, for he never wants to claim them as his own and actually wants to give himself some form of personal permission to use those abilities, so he would rather only fight if he needs to give some form of defense. At the end of a string of missions, you finally get to the last scientist that he decides to enact some revenge on. But before he could do it, some DUP agents burst into the scientist's area and are about to attack. But an extra officer comes from behind the group and takes down all of the other DUP agents. He sounds out of breath and he probably says,
"Damn it, man, why is every one of you bastards so much faster? 50 pounds lighter and I still can't keep the hell up."
He takes his helmet off in an epic way, and it would be Zeke Dunbar, who has infiltrated the DUP as an undercover agent. Zeke has come to take the scientist in and to be arrested for the crimes of experimenting on people and conduits. Dawn refuses, and then you get prompted another decision to allow Dawn to kill the scientist with his powers and to become a fugitive to Zeke, or to spare the scientist, resist the use of the powers, and hand him to Zeke. Also, Zeke in this version of the story is older and is much fitter and is a lot more skilled, but he's still kind of a jackass. And you can make it imply that he works with other FBI agents after the death of Quo due to the original story, and he wants to actually be fighting in the name of conduits due to the sacrifice of Cole and Quo. I would also make it that he takes pieces of RFI technology from Infamous 2 and engineered some tech that allows him to come off of being a concrete conduit without actually being one. Zeke has a conversation with Delsin and Reggie and tells them to be wary of the people that they are working with and hopes he doesn't have to go against them for any wrong decisions they may make later on. However, he doesn't tell them that he's also on a secret mission to destroy Prime B, the main project that is Dawn, due to the highly destructive capabilities that can be utilized with the 3 conduit powers at his disposal. And additionally, he has a device designed to actually go against Augustine, but he doesn't reveal it later because it also might lead to the sacrifice of another conduit. Now, in this case, we're pushing closer to the end of the story. Reggie helps you find Eugene, the last escapee. Pretty much the same way that the story goes, Eugene helps Delsin with freeing a handful of escaped conduits from capture, and you build Eugene's confidence. Then, similarly in the game, Hank returns again and says that Fetch and Eugene are captured by Augustine and are on a platform outside of the city. However, I adjusted it to where Don wants to help since he heard of their capture and they attempted to capture him, but he was able to get out of their hands. At first, Delsin denies him and tells him to keep himself safe to avoid any problems. Hank helps you to the platform, but however, like in the original game, betrays you. While trying to save Fetch and Eugene, Augustine is about to conceal the concrete prison and is about to possibly kill Fetch and Eugene, but instead a blast is hurled at them and they are freed from the prison. And then all of a sudden you see Don covered in a dark red, white, icy armor. So then you have both Dawn and Delsin fight against Augustine, and you see a combination of ice and swamp powers being thrown and hurled at Augustine in this epic fight. And then obviously you cut to the cutscene of while in between the fighting, Augustine sees Reggie in the distance about to attack her with a rocket launcher because obviously he's helping Delsin at the same time, and he sends a rocket launcher hitting her, but of course he reacts and is able to hit him with some concrete in his feet and at the same time destroying the platform he's standing on. Don runs to attempt to save Reggie, but he gets blasted by Augustine, shattering the platform, and Reggie is about to fall. Delsin catches him, tries to save him, but of course then we get the same death scene that Reggie had in the original game. After his death, Delsin reaches out to Zeke and uses Eugene's app to help track Hank, and we get the same decision as well to either you want to spare or kill Hank. And that would make it dawn, and at some point later on after these interactions, he calls Delsin and profusely apologizes and is greatly apologetic that he wasn't able to help and save Reggie. You can have him go on a master spiel, a long one, and it can be a different dialogue depending on what path you're going, whether it's infamous or good. Zeke would also inform you that not long after the final battle, he needs to keep track of Dawn. He reveals that Prime B is supposed to be a test to be the strongest conduit powers that we're able to get in the last 7 years into one conduit. The full term would be known as Prime Beast, where the conduit powers of John White, Lucy Quo, and Nyx were forced into Dawn, but are incomplete and unstable. Towards the final fight, Dawn would be ahead of you, trying to make things right and trying to stop Augustine on his own. And then actually later on, while this is about to happen, you get revealed by Zeke that he actually needs to use a device that he created that is supposed to be able to extract the abilities from Augustine and be forced into Dawn, because the only proper way to actually be able to stop and save the reservation is to actually make someone else use those abilities. However, unfortunately, the conduit who gets those powers forced in based on those devices would not be able to live afterwards because of the reaction that would happen combining all of those 4 abilities into one conduit. It would be too much for his body to handle. Now later on, we're in the climax, reaching the final act of the story, so Delsin tries to rush to the main area where Augustine is being held at the main Seattle headquarters of the DUP. Delsin makes it to the final area and he meets up with Augustine, and he sees that Dawn and Zeke are already beaten and she's holding on to the device. So before he can able to do anything, Augustine is able to force the abilities of not just the beast but all 3 conduit powers out of Dawn and forcing him to be in some form of manipulative state, making him a half-powered version of the beast in Infamous 2. So then you have this pretty cool boss fight, and once you're close to beating him, Augustine decides to use the powers and extract it from him because she realizes that he's not valuable enough to actually defeat you on your own. So she decides to take the powers and to put them into herself, forcing those abilities into her, which makes her powers a lot stronger and versatile, but is a lot more inexperienced, so it becomes a lot more clunky. And then eventually she learns the inconvenience of having too many abilities in one person, and slowly and surely learns the curse that comes with having so many powers at once. So then the final fight begins with this epic clash between Delsin, Eugene, and Fetch, and then closer to the end, Zeke will begin to join the fight. Once he joins the fight and Augustine's about to be beaten, you can have an interaction where everyone is able to do a combined attack, and then Zeke sneaks up on Augustine and sticks the device in her again and extracts not just the beast, ice, and swamp powers of her, but also her concrete powers, leaving her completely and utterly powerless. which leads us to the final decision of the game, the conclusion. I would make it whether you have the good decision, where if you actually allowed Dawn to sacrifice himself to not only save the reservation by taking all of those powers back and risk his body being destroyed because of the actual conversion of adding those powers back to his body, or the evil decision or infamous decision. I don't know if this is probably the greatest ending I can think of. It is a little bit murky because the problem with Infamous Second Son having some continuation is a little bit hard, because I wouldn't mind having like introducing new characters for conduits in terms of powers abilities, because this franchise is very useful for doing something like that. So if I had to make the infamous decision valuable, I would make it where either Delsin gets to choose to either not necessarily enslave, but more of like a control, becomes like a new dictator leader over Augustine, and then makes conduits the runners of everything. So it would be a little bit more of a control thing. So Dawn doesn't get sacrificed. It's more of like he continues to get experimented on willingly, and then eventually he becomes strong enough to actually be able to save the reservation without taking his life. But you guys tell me what you guys think. Other than that, that's my brief rewrite of Infamous Second Son. The game is okay, the game is good. I actually like the gameplay a little bit, and sometimes every once in a while I might go back to it. But honestly, I've played the Infamous games not just for the gameplay, because that was definitely a massive add-on, but I also played for the story. And I always thought the story was good, and I always enjoyed the story, even if it wasn't the most complicated. But you guys tell me what you think. Do you think I'm talking shit? Do you think my rewrite is dog? Tell me what you guys would have changed if it was up to you. Leave a comment, like on the video, and don't forget to subscribe. I shout out to all of you guys who actually subscribed recently because of my fictional economics video, because we are almost to 1.4K, and I said we're going to do it before the end of the year. We might actually be able to get that before the end of the month, but otherwise goal is still the same, 1.4 before the end of the year. And don't forget to check out my gaming channel, Kadukun Gaming. I haven't been as active as on it recently, but I'm about to do a massive series on that channel, so don't forget to check that one out too. So it's your boy Kadukun. Keep your power levels high and your dreams alive. See you next time, and peace.
FMA, handle business, don't play. On point when it comes to the anime. Jack and Daxter, ayy, let's go. The ultimate heroes, don't stop, we on the road. Kadukun. Yeah, welcome to the channel.